Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk let him swap lives with anyone for 1 hour? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The first sensation was always touch. Today, it was the giving tackiness of dough beneath palms that were not his own. The skin was thick with calluses, the knuckles swollen slightly from what felt like a lifetime of repetitive motion. Flour, fine as dust, caked the creases of his fingers and puffed in a small cloud as he pressed down, folded, and turned the mass on the wooden board. The muscle memory was a ghost possessing his limbs, guiding them with an effortless expertise he did not personally possess. He was a passenger in a body that knew its purpose. He breathed in. The air was warm, pregnant with the sweet, earthy scent of yeast and the sharper, almost scorched aroma of a previous batch of bread cooling on racks nearby. Beneath that, the rich, dark smell of coffee percolated from a machine in the corner. These were the smells of 5:03 a.m. in the Tanaka family bakery. His name, or rather, the name of the man whose life he currently wore like a borrowed coat, was Kenji Tanaka. Age 45. Proprietor. Husband to Emi. Father to Yuna. He knew this not through introduction, but through the faint, shimmering layer of surface thoughts that always came with a new host, a sort of psychic welcome mat. The morning rush will start soon. Did Yuna remember her math homework? Emi looked so beautiful when she was sleeping. These thoughts were not his. They were echoes, impressions left in the sand of this man's consciousness, and he was merely the tide, washing over them for a brief, 60-minute interval. He called himself the Nomad. It was a name he'd given himself centuries of faces ago, a label for the hollow space where a person was supposed to be. He had no body of his own, no name he could prove, no history that wasn't borrowed. He was a consciousness untethered, a phantom cursed with a quirk he called borrowed life. Every hour on the hour, he was violently ripped from one human host and thrust into another. The transition was a chaotic, sensory nightmare, a brief glimpse into the screaming void between realities. Then, a sudden slam of silence, and he would open a new pair of eyes. He would be someone else. A student, a CEO, a janitor, a villain. He'd been men, women, and everything in between. He'd experienced the first flush of love, the searing agony of grief, the mind-numbing boredom of a Tuesday afternoon shift. He'd felt the thrill of a hero's quirk activating and the desperate fear of a cornered purse snatcher. He was a library of 1,000 lives. But the librarian was a ghost. With Kenji Tanaka's hands, he deftly shaped another loaf, the rhythmic motion soothing. He had learned over the years, or what passed for years in his fractured existence, to make the best of his brief stays. He treated each life with a careful, temporary reverence. He was a meticulous houseguest in the mansions and hovels of other people's souls. His primary directive was simple: do no harm. Leave the body where you found it, or in a safe, logical place. Don't spend their money. Don't ruin their relationships. Tidy up the psychic space as best you can before you're evicted. The hosts he'd gathered experienced his tenancy as a brief fugue state. A moment of lost time. They'd blink and find themselves in a different room. A cup of coffee made that they didn't remember brewing. A task completed that was only half started a moment before. Most chalked it up to stress or a momentary lapse in attention. They never knew a stranger had been driving. He glanced at the digital clock on the oven. 5:17 a.m. He had 43 minutes left as a baker. His gaze drifted to a corkboard on the wall, cluttered with invoices and suppliers' numbers. Pinned in the center was a slightly faded photograph. A smiling Kenji, his arm around a woman with a kind face and laugh lines around her eyes, Emi. In front of them, a little girl with missing front teeth held up a peace sign, Yuna. A phantom pang of affection, warm and deep, resonated from Kenji's heart. My girls. My world. The Nomad felt it, acknowledged it, but it was like listening to music through a thick wall. He could appreciate the melody of Kenji's love, but he couldn't feel the rhythm in his own blood. This was the core of his curse. He was the ultimate empath, forced to feel the echoes of everyone's emotions, yet he possessed none of his own. All he had was a single, driving purpose, a cold, hard stone in the river of borrowed feelings, his one mission. His only goal. He closed his eyes, Kenji's eyes, and focused. He pushed past the baker's thoughts of sourdough starters and rising temperatures, digging deeper into his own consciousness. There, locked away behind the memories of 1,000 strangers, was his only personal possession. It wasn't a memory, not a full one. It was a fragment, sharp and painful as a shard of glass. The smell of rain on hot asphalt. The chilling sound of a woman's sob, raw and desperate. A flash of brilliant green hair, dark with rain. The sting of tears on cheeks that felt too small, too soft. And a name, spoken like a prayer and a wound. Izuku, my baby, my poor baby. That was it. That was all he had. He believed, with a certainty that defied all logic, that the crying woman was his mother. He believed, with a faith that was the only religion he knew, that his name was Izuku Midoriya. He had been stolen. Not just his body, but his self. His quirk hadn't just manifested, it had ripped his consciousness from its anchor, setting him adrift on the endless ocean of humanity. For what felt like an eternity, he'd been a passive observer, too young and confused to understand. But as he jumped from mind to mind, he'd grown, he'd learned. He'd cobbled together an intellect from professors, a cunning from criminals, a resolve from heroes, and a patience from old men on park benches. And now, he was hunting. He was searching for a ghost, his own. Searching for the body of a boy named Izuku Midoriya who, according to the cold, hard logic of the world, must have been declared missing a long, long time ago. He had rules for his hunt. In each life, he'd perform a cursory search. A quick check of public records on a borrowed computer. A scan of the news archives. Anything that might mention a missing boy with that name. The results were always the same. A handful of cold case articles from a decade ago, most of them archived and forgotten. Izuku Midoriya, age 4, vanished from Mizurufu. Believed to be quirkless. No leads. Case went cold. Quirkless. The irony was a bitter pill. The world thought him powerless, while he was living 1,000 lives, cursed with the most invasive quirk imaginable. 5:42 a.m. The time was slipping away. He finished shaping the last of the dough, placing it gently on a floured tray. He moved with Kenji's familiar grace, sliding the trays into the cavernous, hot breath of the industrial oven. He cleaned the workbench, wiping away the flour and stray bits of dough, leaving it pristine for its rightful owner. This was part of his code. Leave things better than you found them, if possible. A small atonement for the trespass. He had learned, through trial and excruciating error, that he had a minuscule, almost negligible amount of influence over his next destination. It wasn't control, more like a subtle suggestion. If he focused his entire being on a concept, doctor, police, information, he could sometimes weight the metaphysical dice in his favor. It was like shouting a request into a hurricane, but sometimes, the hurricane listened. Today, his focus had been stability. Safety. He'd come from a harrowing hour as a window washer on the 70th floor of a skyscraper, the wind threatening to snap the harness. He needed a break. The universe had granted him a pre-dawn bakery. It was a small mercy. 5:56 a.m., the final ritual. He had to position the body. He couldn't leave Kenji standing in the middle of the kitchen. The man would blink back into existence, disoriented, and might fall or burn himself on the hot oven. The nomad walked Kenji's body to the small, cluttered office in the back. He sat the baker down in his worn leather chair, placing his hands on the desk as if he'd been reviewing receipts. A natural, plausible position. He took one last look around the small, warm world of Kenji Tanaka. The scent of baking bread was a comfort. The photo of his family was a beacon. It was a good life. A life he would remember, for a time, before it was buried under the weight of the next one, and the one after that. 5:58 a.m. He closed Kenji's eyes. He braced himself. 5:59 a.m. A low hum started in the base of his skull, the sound of a cosmic tuning fork. A strange, weightless lurch pulled at him from behind his navel, the anchor of his consciousness being forcibly unmoored. The clock on the wall ticked over. 6 a.m. The world shattered. It did not fade or dissolve. It fractured like a pane of glass struck by a hammer. The warm bakery splintered into a million shards of light and sound. He was ripped out of Kenji Tanaka with a silent scream, thrown into the chaotic, blinding torrent between spaces. It was a waterfall of pure, unfiltered sensory data. A symphony of noise and chaos. Taste of cheap instant noodles, a college student cramming for exams, smell of antiseptic and latex gloves, a surgeon beginning an operation, sight of a stock market ticker scrolling in red, a frantic day trader, sound of a baby crying, a new mother, exhausted and overwhelmed, feeling of crushing pressure deep underwater, a salvage diver, 1,000 potential lives, 1,000 possible prisons, rushed past him. It was overwhelming, terrifying. He had no control. He was just a piece of driftwood in a tsunami, praying not to be dashed against the rocks. He fought to hold on to the single shard of his own identity, the name Izuku, repeating it like a mantra against the storm. Izuku. 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 Then, with the same sudden violence it began, it ended. Slam. Reality reasserted itself with the force of a physical blow. The torrent ceased. Silence. Darkness. He took a breath. The air was cool, sterile, conditioned. It tasted faintly of chalk dust and floor polish. He opened his eyes. He was sitting down. The chair was hard plastic, uncomfortable. Before him was a sleek gray desk. The light was bright, fluorescent. He was in a classroom. The body he inhabited felt small, light. He flexed his fingers. They were slender, delicate. He looked down at his lap. A navy blue pleated skirt. White blouse. Red tie. A school uniform. This was new. He'd been students before, but this felt different. There was a low-level, persistent hum of energy beneath his skin, a strange, floaty sensation in his gut, as if gravity had slightly loosened its grip on him. It was a quirk. A powerful one, judging by the constant, thrumming presence. A voice cut through the air, amplified and enthusiastic. And so, the revised Quirk Usage in Urban Environments Act, also known as the crushing defeat for public property bill by some of my more cynical friends, has drastically changed the legal landscape for heroes on patrol. Can I get a yeah? The nomad's head snapped up. He knew that voice. He'd heard it 1,000 times on the radio, on TV, in the lives of hero-obsessed teenagers he'd briefly been. It was the voice hero, Present Mike. His gaze swept the room. It was a modern classroom, filled with about 20 students. But these weren't just any students. To his left sat a tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses, his posture ramrod straight, radiating an aura of intense focus. A few seats away, a boy with hair perfectly divided into white and red sat with stoic indifference, a faint mist of condensation rising from his right side. In the row ahead, a spiky-haired blonde was slumped in his seat, radiating an almost visible wave of impatient, explosive anger, like a lit fuse on a bomb. The nomad's borrowed heart began to pound. He knew these kids. Not personally, but he'd inhabited people who did. Fans. News reporters. Civilians who had been saved by them. This wasn't just any school. This was the pinnacle. The absolute zenith of hero society. He was at UA High School. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in his throat, but years of practice allowed him to suppress it. Stay calm. Observe. Blend in. He forced his gaze forward, feigning attention to present Mick's lecture. His eyes fell on the nameplate affixed to the edge of her desk. The clean, printed kanji stared back at him, a key to his current cage, Ochako Uraraka. The name settled in his mind, and with it came a fresh wave of her surface thoughts, stronger and more vibrant than the baker's. They were a torrent of youthful energy. Focus, Ochako. This will be on the final exam. I wonder what my parents are doing. I hope they're not working too hard. I need to get stronger so I can help them. So I can be a real hero. Like Deku. The name made him flinch. Deku. It was a nickname he knew from Uraraka's memories. A term of endearment, and it belonged to the boy sitting next to her. Slowly, carefully, he turned his head. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sitting there, scribbling furiously in a notebook, was a boy with a wild mane of green-black hair. A spray of freckles dusted his cheeks. He was muttering under his breath. A habit Uraraka's mind supplied was both constant and endearing. He was focused, intense, and completely unaware of the existential crisis happening in the seat beside him. It was his face. Or it was the face his 4-year-old self would have grown into. The same hair color from his one fragmented memory. The same features he'd tried to imagine 1,000 times. It was him. It was Izuku Midoriya. The nomad felt a cold, dizzying wave of vertigo. For a decade, he had searched for this boy, this body. He had imagined this moment, played it out in his mind 1,000,000 times. He would find the body, inert in a hospital bed or worse. He would find a cold case file. He would find a grave. He never, in his wildest, most desperate fantasies, imagined he would find the body alive. He never imagined he would find it here, sitting in a UA classroom, training to be a hero. And he never, ever, imagined he would be inhabiting the body of a girl who, according to the warm, blushing feeling that was currently flooding his borrowed heart, had a monumental crush on him. The sheer, crushing irony of it was a physical weight. He was everyone but himself. And now, he was the girl who adored the boy he was supposed to be. He couldn't breathe. Uraraka's lungs felt tight, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was having a panic attack in someone else's body. He gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white. On her fingertips, little pink pads seemed to glow with a faint energy. Zero gravity. Her quirk. If he lost control, he might send the desk, or himself, floating to the ceiling. Calm down. Calm down. He recited the mantra he developed for moments like these, a technique pieced together from a brief stint as a Zen monk. He focused on his breathing, on the sensation of the hard plastic chair, the drone of present Mick's voice. He's alive. That's what matters. He's alive and he's here. But how? How was this possible? If this boy was Izuku Midoriya, then who, or what, was he? Was he a copy? A psychic echo? Was his quirk not borrowed life but split consciousness? The questions spiraled, each one more terrifying than the last. Or was it simpler? Was this just a coincidence? A doppelganger? The world was a big place. Two people could look alike. He needed proof. He forced his new body to relax, uncurling Uraraka's fingers from the desk. The boy, Midoriya, next to him paused his muttering and glanced over, his green eyes wide with concern. Uraraka? You okay? You look a little pale, his voice. It was just a voice, but hearing it directed at him sent another shockwave through his system. Uraraka's emotions surged, a wave of warmth and flustered affection at the attention. The nomad felt it crash against the shore of his own shock and confusion. He had to answer. He accessed Uraraka's memories for conversational patterns, for the sound of her own voice. He opened his mouth, and her voice came out, a little shaky, but passable. Oh. Why yeah, I'm fine, Deku. Just spaced out for a second. This new law is a lot to take in, you know? He even managed a wobbly smile. It felt alien on his face, a mask on top of a mask. Midoriya's expression softened, and he gave a small, reassuring nod before turning back to his notes. Yeah, it is. But it's super important stuff. His voice trailed off as he began muttering again. The nomad let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He'd survived the first interaction. But the encounter had cemented one thing in his mind. The feeling he got from looking at the boy, it wasn't just physical recognition. It was a deep, primal resonance, a feeling of looking at a lost part of himself. This was no coincidence. This boy was Izuku Midoriya, which meant the body, the original, was not lost. It had been living its own life. A life that should have been his. A life where he became a hero. A cold, unfamiliar emotion began to crystallize in the void of his being. It was sharper than the borrowed sadness of 1,000 lonely nights, colder than the phantom grief of 100 funerals. It was a feeling that was truly, finally, his own. It was rage. He had been robbed. Not of his life. He'd had more of those than anyone in history. He'd been robbed of his story. While he was adrift, a ghost in the machine, this body had gone on without him. It had made friends. It had enrolled in the best hero school in the world. It had a future. While he was being a 45-year-old baker, the bell rang, a shrill, piercing sound that shattered the tense silence of his thoughts. The lecture was over. Students started to stir, chairs scraping against the floor as they packed their bags for the next class. He had maybe 40 minutes left as Ochako Uraraka. 40 minutes inside the walls of UA High, closer to the truth than he had ever been in his entire existence. He couldn't waste it. He watched Midoriya chat animatedly with the tall, serious boy, Ida, Uraraka's mind supplied. They were friends. Close friends. He had to know more. He had to confirm it. He, as Uraraka, fumbled with her backpack, his movements still clumsy in this new frame. His mind was racing, formulating a plan with the speed of a chess grandmaster he'd once been for an hour. He needed information. He needed access. A student terminal. A library. Anything. This was no longer just a hunt for a memory. It was a quest to reclaim an identity. He stood up, his legs feeling strangely light. He looked at his own face, now worn by another soul, laughing with his friends. And for the first time, the nomad didn't just feel like a ghost. He felt like he was haunting the wrong life. He slung the backpack over his shoulder. He had a new purpose, a new focus for the metaphysical dice roll of his quirk. He was no longer searching for a missing person. He was staging a rescue mission. For himself. The bell's echo faded, replaced by the cacophony of a released student body. Chairs scraped, bags were zipped, and the low drone of present mixed lecture erupted into 100 different conversations. The air, once thick with forced attention, now crackled with the vibrant, chaotic energy of teenagers freed from their cages. For the nomad, it was like being plunged from a silent, dark room into the heart of a festival. He remained seated, a statue of forced calm in the swirling river of Class 1A. His borrowed hands, Ochako Uraraka's hands, were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were pale. The boy he was meant to be, Izuku Midoriya, was now standing, animatedly discussing the lecture with the tall, engine-legged boy, Tenya Ida. Midoriya's hands flew as he spoke, carving excited shapes in the air, his face alight with a passion that felt achingly, infuriatingly familiar. It was the passion of 1,000 hosts, the drive of every ambitious soul he'd ever inhabited. But seeing it on that face, his face, was like watching a stranger wear his stolen skin. The cold, hard knot of rage in his core began to thaw, melting into something far more complex and painful. It was a grief for a life unlived. A jealousy so profound it felt like a physical illness. This boy, this usurper, had friends. He had a dream he was actively pursuing. He had a name that people said with affection. Deku. The nomad felt a surge of Uraraka's own emotions welling up, a powerful tide threatening to swamp his own fragile sense of self. It was a wave of fierce, protective warmth directed at the green-haired boy. He's so passionate. He's going to be the greatest hero. The feeling was so pure, so genuine, that it was nauseating. He was a phantom, wearing the flesh of a girl who adored the boy whose life he was stolen from. The universe had a sick and twisted sense of humor. He had to move. Sitting here, paralyzed, was a waste of precious time. He had, at most, 50 minutes left in this body. 50 minutes within the most secure and information-rich heroic institution on the planet. Forcing Uraraka's pliant limbs to obey, he stood up. The movement was accompanied by a strange, almost giddy sensation of lightness, a persistent hum from the base of her spine. It was her quirk, zero gravity. It wasn't just a power she activated, it was a part of her being. Her default state was a half step away from floating away, a constant, gentle pull towards the sky that she had to consciously ground. The nomad understood it instantly. It was a hero's burden made manifest. She carried the weight of the world by trying to make everything else weightless. He watched Midoriya and Ida start to walk towards the door, their conversation a low, enthusiastic murmur. A desperate, primal urge surged through him. Follow them. Don't let him out of your sight. He slung Uraraka's surprisingly heavy backpack over her shoulder and fell into step a few paces behind them, trying to look casual, like just another student heading to their next class. The hallway was a vibrant tapestry of lives he would never lead. Students with quirks that made their bodies spark, shimmer, or stretch milled about, laughing and shouting. It was a world of power and potential, and he was just a tourist. As he walked, he delved deeper into the consciousness of his host. It was a necessary survival tactic, a way to build a functional persona quickly. But with Uraraka, it was different. Her mind wasn't a collection of surface-level anxieties and to-do lists like the baker's. It was a sun-drenched landscape of overwhelming, powerful feeling. He felt her determination, a solid, unyielding pillar in the center of her soul. It was a resolve forged not for glory or fame, but for love. He felt the weight of her parents' hopes, the texture of their calloused hands from their construction work, the faint scent of concrete dust that clung to their clothes. He felt her burning desire to give them an easy life, to lift that burden from their shoulders with her own gravity-defying hands. It was a love so fierce and selfless it was almost painful to witness. This was the hero's burden. It wasn't about fighting villains or saving cities. It was about the quiet, crushing weight of love, and the desperate need to be strong enough to carry it. He'd inhabited heroes before, grizzled veterans, flashy rookies, but their drives were often tangled with ego, fame, or adrenaline. Uraraka's was pure. It was a clean, bright flame, and it made him feel profoundly, achingly empty. His own one memory, a crying mother, a whispered name, was a flickering candle compared to this bonfire. He had a goal, a mission. But he had no love to fuel it. Only a cold, intellectual need for answers. They rounded a corner, and Midoriya and Ida paused by a large window overlooking one of UA's massive training grounds. The nomad slowed his pace, pretending to be searching for something in his backpack to avoid suspicion. He kept his head down, but his ears, Uraraka's ears, were strained, trying to catch their words over the din of the hallway. He was too far away. He could only catch snippets. The foundational mechanics of, but All Might said. Frustration gnawed at him. This was useless. He was just stalking his own ghost. He needed a real lead, a concrete piece of evidence. The articles he'd found online over the years were a dead end. He needed something from the inside. Just as he was about to give up and head for the library, two figures approached from the opposite direction, their presence cutting a swathe through the sea of students. One was Present Mike, his ridiculous blonde hair still defying gravity, a wide grin plastered on his face. The other was a stark contrast, a man who looked perpetually exhausted, wrapped in a gray scarf, with dark, cynical eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Shota Aizawa. Eraserhead. Class 1A's homeroom teacher. Shota! My man! Don't look so glum, it's a beautiful day for heroics. Present Mike boomed, clapping Aizawa on the shoulder with enough force to make a normal person stumble. Aizawa didn't flinch. It's a beautiful day for a nap, Hizashi. You just subjected my students to an hour of your shouting. My ears are still ringing. That's just the sound of learning. The nomad froze, his hands still inside Uraraka's backpack. They were right there, only a few feet away. He pressed himself against the wall, hoping to become invisible. Speaking of which, Aizawa said, his tone shifting from weary banter to something more serious, I was reviewing the security updates for the faculty archives. We're migrating the old servers. Present Mike groaned. Ugh, the digital dust bunnies. Don't remind me. I had to sign off on the declassification protocols for a dozen cold cases from a decade ago. Talk about a trip down memory lane. Most of it was just petty theft, Quirk registration errors. He trailed off, a shadow passing over his usually sunny features. Though one of them still gives me the creeps. The nomad's heart, Uraraka's heart, gave a violent lurch. His entire being went still. The noise of the hallway faded into a dull roar. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Which one? The Musudafu vanishing boy, Present Mike said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. That Midoriya kid. Remember? Popped off the face of the earth from right outside a Quirk clinic. No ransom, no body, no witnesses. Just gone. Like a ghost. The world tilted. The name, spoken so casually, so concretely, by a pro-hero, was a physical blow. It wasn't just a half-remembered dream. It was real. It was a case file. It was a creepy story people told each other. He was real. Aizawa's expression was grim. I remember. Tragic. They listed him as quirkless, didn't they? Made the chances of finding him even lower. No tracker chip, no biological markers to trace. He was a ghost in the system even before he disappeared. Quirkless. There it was again. The lie that had defined his stolen life. Yeah, Mike sighed, shaking his head as if to clear the thought. Anyway, the new server is a nightmare. The interface looks like it was designed by a squirrel on caffeine. You're going to hate it. He clapped Aizawa on the back again, his buoyant personality reasserting itself. Catch you later. Got to prep for my radio show. Yeah, with a final, deafening shout, Present Mike strode off down the hall. Aizawa watched him go with a long-suffering sigh, then continued on his way. The nomad didn't move. He was rooted to the spot, Uraraka's body trembling with the aftershock of the revelation. Her surface thoughts were a confused jumble. Midoriya? Like Deku? Was that a relative of his? Poor kid. She was making a logical, compassionate leap. She couldn't possibly know the truth, but the nomad knew, this was it. The first external, undeniable confirmation of his existence and his disappearance in a decade. A spark ignited in the cold, hollow space of his soul. It wasn't the warm flame of Uraraka's love, it was a sharp, biting spark of pure, unadulterated hope. He had a lead. A real one. And he was in the one place on Earth where he might be able to follow it, the UA archives. He tore his gaze away from Midoriya and Ida, who were now oblivious to the existential drama that had just unfolded nearby. They were his past and his future, but right now, he needed to focus. He turned and strode down the hall in the opposite direction, his steps filled with a purpose that was entirely his own, even if the legs weren't. Uraraka's mind supplied the location of the school library. It was vast, a multi-story testament to the accumulation of knowledge. He bypassed the main reading areas, the comfortable chairs and study carrels. He needed a terminal. A student access point to the UA network. He found a row of them in a quieter, more secluded alcove on the second floor. He slipped into a chair, the cool plastic a stark contrast to the fire in his veins. The screen flickered to life, asking for a student ID and password. He paused. He didn't know Uraraka's password. He closed his eyes, focusing, pushing past her immediate thoughts about hero training and Machi. He searched for the muscle memory, the ingrained, automatic knowledge. Think, Ochako, you're logging in to check your grades. What do your fingers type? He found it. A faint, kinetic echo. Her fingers flying over a keyboard. He placed his own, her own, fingers on the keys and let the ghost guide them. Username, O.Uraraka_77, password, access granted. He let out a shaky breath. He was in. The UA intranet homepage blossomed on the screen, a dizzying array of links, course schedules, cafeteria menus, training logs, news bulletins. And there, tucked away under a resources tab, was a link that made his borrowed heart skip a beat. Library archives. He clicked it. The system was fast, professional. Not some cobbled-together public network. This was the real deal. A search bar appeared. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. What to type? He started broad. Search, cold cases, Musitifu. A list of files appeared, dozens of them. Petty crimes, burglaries, minor villain incidents that were never resolved. He scanned the dates. He was looking for something roughly a decade old. His eyes caught a file name, case_734_vanish_mupch.redact. That had to be it. Vanish. MU from Musitifu. The rest was likely an internal code. The .redact suffix sent a chill down his spine. He clicked it. A security warning flashed on the screen. Warning. This file contains information classified level 4, faculty staff only. Student access is restricted to public summary. He clicked proceed. The file opened. It was stark, cold, and mostly black. Thick, dark bars covered 90% of the text, a digital tombstone. But what was left was enough to steal the air from Uraraka's lungs. Incident report, case 734. Subject, Midoriya Izuku. Status, missing. Presumed deceased. Age at time of disappearance, 4. Date of disappearance, redacted. Location of disappearance, sidewalk, Musitifu Private Quirk Research Clinic. Summary. Subject vanished during a 5-minute window while his mother, Midoriya Inko, was inside the clinic settling payment. No witnesses came forward. Extensive canvassing of the area yielded no leads, no signs of struggle. No ransom demand was ever made. Quirk status Quirkless. Note. Subject was confirmed Quirkless by Dr. Redacted at the aforementioned clinic on the day of his disappearance. Lack of a biological quirk factor makes standard genetic tracing and tracking impossible. Investigation status cold. Case officially closed, redacted years ago. File archived. He read it once. Twice. 3 times. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his old life. Age 4. That felt right. The memory fragment he had was from the perspective of a small child. Presumed deceased. The words were hollow, clinical, but they hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. The world had given up on him. He had been written off, and then, the most damning part. Quirkless, confirmed by a doctor on the very day he vanished. It was a lie. A deliberate, calculated lie. He was living, breathing proof that it was a lie. His entire existence was a quirk. Someone had lied on an official document, and then he had disappeared. This wasn't a random abduction. It wasn't a simple kidnapping. This was a conspiracy. He frantically tried to click on the redacted sections. The black bars remained stubbornly opaque. A new pop-up appeared, insufficient clearance. Access denied? He slammed Uraraka's fist on the desk, a sudden, sharp crack that made a nearby student look up from their book with a frown. He ignored them. The rage was back, pure and hot. He was so close. The name of the doctor, the clinic, the lead investigators, it was all right there, hidden behind a digital wall. He tried a different approach. He went back to the search bar. He typed in Midoriya Izuku. Nothing. Muzidafa vanishing boy. Only a link back to the same redacted file. He tried to use the terminal's command prompt, drawing on the memory of a short, exhilarating hour he'd spent as a black hat hacker. He tried to bypass the security, to brute force the firewall. Access denied? Unauthorized activity detected. IP logged. He froze. He'd overplayed his hand. He quickly closed the windows, clearing the search history, his heart hammering against his ribs. He couldn't afford to get Uraraka in trouble. He had used her life, her access, and now he was leaving a trail that could lead back to her. He glanced at the clock in the corner of the screen. 6:48 a.m. He had 12 minutes left. 12 minutes. He was going to be ripped away from this place, from this lead, and thrown back into the random chaos of the world. He might land in the body of a fishmonger in Hokkaido. He might be a traffic warden in Fukuoka. He could be anywhere, and this precious, fragile thread of hope would be lost. He slumped back in the chair, despair a cold, heavy blanket. He had failed. He'd gotten closer than ever before, only to be stopped by a password he couldn't crack. He needed to get the information out. He needed to give it to someone who could get past that wall. A pro-hero. The police. Aizawa? No, how could he contact him? An anonymous email would be flagged and deleted by UA's security protocols in a second. His gaze fell to the phone sitting on the desk next to the keyboard. Uraraka's phone. It was a simple, slightly dated model with a cute machi charm hanging from it. An idea sparked, born of pure desperation. It was reckless. It was impulsive. It broke his primary rule, do no harm. This could entangle Uraraka in something dangerous, but the alternative, letting the trail go cold forever, was unthinkable. He picked up the phone. He needed a contact. Someone trustworthy. Someone who investigated things for a living. His mind, still swimming in the sea of Uraraka's consciousness, snagged on a memory. It was from a few months ago. Uraraka watching the news with her parents, a segment on a detective famous for his incredible arrest record and his truth quirk, which could infallibly detect lies. A man who worked closely with All Might and the top heroes. Detective Naomi Tsukauchi. Uraraka had him in her contacts. Not his private number, of course, but the public tip line for his department at the Muzidafa police force. She'd saved it after watching the news report, a small act of hero-worshipping preparedness. His fingers flew over the screen, his movements clumsy but driven by a frantic energy. He opened a new, anonymous text message. What to write? It had to be short. Cryptic. Unforgettable. Something that would bypass the usual crank filters and snag a truth-seeker's attention. He typed, deleted, and typed again. His thumb hovered over the send button. This was it. He was throwing a message in a bottle into a vast, churning ocean, hoping the one person who could understand it would find it. He took a deep breath. 6:57 a.m. He hit send. The message: look into the Izuku Midoriya cold case. The one from 10 years ago. The Muzutafu vanishing boy. The Quirk registry was wrong. It was sent. There was no taking it back. He quickly deleted the message from the phone's sent folder, cleared the browser history again, and powered the device down. He placed it back on the desk, arranging it exactly as it had been before. 6:58 a.m. The low hum began in his skull. The familiar, dreadful prelude to his eviction. He closed Uraraka's eyes. He had to leave her in a plausible situation. Sitting at a library terminal was perfect. She'd wake up in a moment, thinking she just dozed off while studying. She might be confused, might wonder why she was researching old cases, but hopefully, she would dismiss it. 6:59 a.m. The pull started, a violent wrenching at the core of his being. This time, it felt different. He fought it. He tried to cling to Uraraka's consciousness, to the solid reality of the UA library, to the hope he had just ignited. He didn't want to go. He wanted to stay, to see what happened next. But the hurricane did not care for his wishes. The clock ticked to 7 a.m. The world shattered. Taste of salt and brine. A fisherman hauling in his nets. Smell of ozone and rain. A woman huddled under an awning. Sight of a spreadsheet filled with numbers. An accountant working late. The torrent of lives pulled him under. He let go of the library, of the redacted file, of the face of the boy who should have been him. The only thing he clung to was the faint, desperate hope that his message in a bottle would find its shore. Ochako Uraraka blinked. Her eyes slowly focused on the grain of the polished wood desk in front of her. A faint line of drool was drying on its surface. She sat up with a start, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Had she fallen asleep? In the library? She looked at the clock on the terminal screen. 7:01 a.m. She must have been more tired than she thought. She remembered coming here after present mixed class, intending to review her notes. But after that, it was a blank. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog. A weird, lingering sense of anger and desperation clung to her, a strange emotional residue she couldn't explain. She felt as if she'd just woken from an incredibly intense dream she couldn't remember. She went to check the time on her phone, picking it up from the desk. It was powered off. That was weird. She never turned it off completely. She powered it on, a vague sense of unease settling over her. As it booted up, she looked back at the computer screen. The UA intranet homepage was open. She checked the browser history, a flicker of curiosity prompting her. The last few searches made her frown in confusion. Cold cases, Muzutafu. Case _734 vanish _mupch.redact. Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya? Like Deku? A chill, completely unrelated to the library's air conditioning, trickled down her spine. Why on earth would she be researching that? The name sounded vaguely familiar, from that conversation she'd overheard between the teachers. The vanishing boy. She must have been sleep browsing. It was the only explanation. But it left her with a deep, unsettling feeling, a sense of having touched something vast and hidden just beyond the edge of her memory. Shaking her head, she packed her bag. It was just a weird lapse. Nothing more. She had hero training to get to. She had to focus. But as she walked out of the library, leaving the silent terminal behind, she couldn't shake the name from her mind. Izuku Midoriya. The drop from the rarefied air of UA High was dizzying and immediate. One moment, the nomad was a vessel of nascent hope, a girl trembling with the potential of a world-changing discovery. The next, he was a man named Akio Takeda, and the only thing he was discovering was the bottom of his third cup of lukewarm, vending machine coffee. The world had shrunk to the gray, fabric-lined walls of a cubicle. The air tasted of stale air conditioning and quiet desperation. Akio's surface thoughts were a frantic, looping litany of quarterly reports, looming deadlines, and a dull, throbbing anxiety about his son's tuition fees. The nomad felt the borrowed stress settle over him like a shroud. He'd gone from the heart of the hero world to the beige, soul-crushing purgatory of mid-level corporate accounting. For the next 59 minutes, he performed Akio Takeda's job with a numb, detached efficiency. He filled out spreadsheets, answered emails with polite, meaningless pleasantries, and pretended to laugh at a manager's bad joke by the water cooler. All the while, his own consciousness was a raging storm just beneath the surface. The memory of the UA library, of the redacted file, of Midoriya's concerned face, felt less like a memory and more like a fever dream. Had it even been real? The text message he'd sent felt like a child's prayer shouted into a hurricane. What were the odds it would even be read, let alone taken seriously? The police must get thousands of crank tips a day. His moment of decisive action now seemed foolish, a desperate gamble that had likely already failed. The hope that had ignited within him was dwindling, starved of oxygen in the sterile office air. The hour ended. Akio Takeda blinked, looked at his completed report with a vague sense of surprise, and took another sip of his cold coffee. He didn't notice the ghost that had just vacated his body. The next landing was just as jarring, sunlight, harsh and blinding. The stench of hot asphalt and exhaust fumes. A cacophony of car horns, rumbling engines, and the impatient shouts of pedestrians. He was standing in the middle of a busy intersection, his arm, the arm of a middle-aged woman in a crisp blue uniform, raised to halt a line of advancing cars. He was Officer Hana Sato of the Mizuta Traffic Division. Her life was a metronome of red, yellow, and green. Her thoughts were of her aching feet, the argument she'd had with her sister that morning, and a constant, low-level vigilance for reckless drivers. For an hour, the nomad directed the flow of civilization, a god of a single crosswalk. He was surrounded by thousands of people, thousands of potential lives, yet he had never felt more alone or more powerless. Each passing car was a reminder of his own stagnation. The world was moving on, and the trail was growing colder with every minute he spent in these incidental lives. Frustration became a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of his throat. He was a passive observer again, a piece of cosmic flotsam. The brief, tantalizing taste of agency he'd experienced as Ochako Uraraka was gone, replaced by this crushing impotence. He'd touched the edge of his own story, only to be flung back into the anonymous anthology of everyone else's. The hour ended. Officer Sato blinked, blew her whistle with renewed vigor, and wondered absently if she was due for a lunch break. The next swap was a blur. A stay-at-home dad, overwhelmed by the smell of a dirty diaper and the sound of a crying infant. A teenager stocking shelves at a convenience store, mind-numb with boredom. A dog walker, tangled in the leashes of 3 hyperactive poodles. Each jump was another layer of psychic silt burying the memory of UA. He was losing it. The urgency, the clarity, it was all fading, being replaced by the mundane realities of others. He was inhabiting the body of a retired florist named Kenta, carefully pruning a bonsai tree, when the decision crystallized. He couldn't wait for luck anymore. He couldn't afford another hour as an accountant, or a traffic cop. The universe's random lottery was not on his side. He had to weight the dice. He had tried it before, with limited success. It was a difficult, draining process, more art than science. He had to focus his entire consciousness, his very being, on a single, abstract concept, hoping to influence the trajectory of his next jump. It required immense concentration, a total submersion into an idea, drowning out the host's thoughts and the distractions of their life. As Kenta's gnarled fingers delicately snipped a tiny branch, the nomad closed his borrowed eyes. He had 10 minutes. He let go of the gentle, peaceful thoughts of the old florist. He let go of the frustration and despair. He needed to become a vessel for a single word: investigation. He didn't just think the word, he tried to become it. He dredged up every relevant memory from the 1,000 lives he'd lived. He summoned the memory of a private eye he'd been for an hour, the smell of stale cigarette smoke in a cheap office, the satisfying click of a camera shutter capturing an unfaithful spouse. He conjured the feeling of a librarian's fingers tracing over ancient, dusty texts, searching for a single, forgotten footnote. He recalled the adrenaline spike of a journalist on a deadline, frantically connecting sources, the clatter of the keyboard a frantic drumbeat against the ticking clock. He visualized a magnifying glass, a corkboard covered in string and photographs, the cold, hard logic of a detective's stare from a movie he'd seen through a teenager's eyes. He flooded his mind with the concepts: truth, evidence, suspicion, discovery, justice. The host's peaceful world of flowers and tranquil gardens dissolved under the force of his will. Kenta's mind, a quiet pond, was now a raging whirlpool of an obsession that was not his own. The nomad was pouring every ounce of his ethereal energy into this one desperate prayer, this one demand to the cosmos. Take me to someone who seeks the truth. The hum began in his skull, earlier and more intense than usual. The world of the bonsai garden began to flicker at the edges. The pull was different this time, not the chaotic, multidirectional tearing of a standard swap, but a focused, violent lunge, as if his consciousness had been harpooned and was being reeled in. The world didn't shatter. It compressed into a single, blinding point of light and then shot forward down a dark tunnel. Slam! He landed with a jolt that felt more solid, more real than any arrival before. The first thing he registered was the smell. Stale coffee, so strong it was almost bitter. A faint, lingering ghost of cigarette smoke, not his own, but a colleague's. And paper. The dry, dusty, slightly sweet smell of thousands of paper files. He opened his eyes. He was sitting in a cluttered office, the only light coming from a green-shaded desk lamp that cast a pool of weary illumination over a mountain of paperwork. The rest of the room was lost in shadow, suggesting a late hour or a perpetually gloomy workspace. The chair was worn leather, cracked and sagging in a way that spoke of countless long nights. The body he inhabited was tired. Not the physical exhaustion of a laborer, but a deep, bone-deep weariness, the kind that came from staring into the abyss of human nature for too long. Yet beneath the fatigue, there was a foundation of solid, unyielding resolve. This was a man who ran on caffeine and conviction. He looked down at his hands. They were large, capable, resting on a keyboard. On the monitor in front of him, a blank incident report form glowed expectantly. He glanced around the desk. A framed photo showed a smiling young woman who looked like a younger version of himself, a sister or a niece, perhaps. A chipped ceramic mug read "World's Okayest Detective." Then, he felt the quirk. It wasn't a hum of energy like Uraraka's, or a physical alteration. It was a subtle, constant, and utterly profound shift in his perception of reality. It was a sense, as fundamental as sight or hearing, a low-level, persistent resonance that emanated from everything. It was the feeling of truth. He focused on the mug. World's Okayest Detective. The statement produced a feeling in his gut that was clean, solid, and harmonious. It was a joke, but it was an honest one. It was true to the owner's self-deprecating nature. He thought of the files piled on the desk. These cases are difficult. The feeling was a clear, ringing chime. True. I will solve them all. A faint, subtle discordance, like a single off-key note in a symphony. A lie. Not a malicious lie, but an optimistic one. A hope, not a certainty. This was it. The man's quirk, a passive, always-on ability called human lie detector. The man knew, with absolute, gut-level certainty, when he was being told a lie. The nomad felt a wave of awe. To live in a world without deception, without comforting illusions, it must be a special kind of hell. He didn't need to see a nameplate. He knew where he was. He knew who he was. His gamble had paid off beyond his wildest dreams. He was in the body of Detective Naomi Satsukachi, the recipient of his desperate, anonymous text message. A giddy, triumphant laugh almost escaped his lips, but he caught it. He couldn't afford a single misstep. He didn't know how long Tsukauchi had been here, what he was working on. He had to blend in seamlessly. He flexed Tsukauchi's fingers over the keyboard. The detective's own thoughts were a low murmur, a background hum of case details and a craving for another coffee. But beneath that, there was a strange, new itch. A persistent, nagging feeling of something left undone. The nomad realized with a jolt that he could feel the ghost of his own influence. The text message had been received. Tsukauchi had likely seen it, and his quirk would have registered the core statement. The quirk registry was wrong, as truth. It would have planted a seed of cognitive dissonance in his mind, a puzzle his brain was subconsciously trying to solve. The nomad didn't need to convince Tsukachi to look into the case. He just needed to give him the tools. He wasted no time. With Tsukachi's practice, decisive movements, he navigated away from the blank incident report. He opened the Musudafa Police Department's internal database, a stark, utilitarian system a world away from UA's polished network. His heart, Tsukachi's heart, pounded a steady, heavy rhythm. This was it. The moment of truth. The login screen appeared. He let the detective's muscle memory take over, his fingers flying across the keys, entering a username and a long, complex password. Access granted? Welcome, Detective Tsukachi. Clearance level 7, Major Crimes Division / Hero Liaison. Level 7. Far beyond the student-level access that had blocked him at UA. This was the master key. He navigated to the cold case archives. His fingers typed the name with a reverence he hadn't felt in 1,000 lifetimes. Search, Midoriya Izuku. A single file appeared. Case _734. No .redact suffix. Just a plain, unvarnished case number. He clicked it. A pop-up appeared, not a warning, but a note. This file is cross-referenced with UA High School Archive File Case _734_vanish_much.redact. Do you wish to link sessions? His breath hitched. The systems were connected. UA must have shared the file with the police during the initial investigation. He clicked yes. The file loaded. And this time, there were no black bars. It was all there, raw and unfiltered. A 10-year-old tragedy lay bare on the glowing screen. He scrolled past the summary he already knew. He went straight to the witness statements, the meat of the investigation that had been denied to him. The first was the full, unabridged transcript of his mother's interview. Her words were frantic, disjointed, rendered phonetically by a stoic patrol officer. I was only inside for 5 minutes. 5 minutes! Just to pay. He was right there. He was drawing a picture of All Might on the pavement with chalk. He loved All Might so much. I told him not to wander off. He was a good boy. He always listened. I came back out, and he was just gone. The chalk was still there. The drawing, it wasn't even finished. The nomad had to stop, closing Tsukachi's eyes for a moment. He could feel the phantom sting of tears. His mother's pain, a decade old, was so potent it felt fresh. Tsukachi's Quirk registered it as pure, unadulterated, agonizing truth. He forced himself to continue. He scrolled down, past the fruitless canvassing reports and the negative results from security camera footage. Then he found it. The section on the clinic. Institution. Tsubasa General Quirk Counseling Research. Proprietor Chief Physician, Dr. Tsubasa Kenji. Age 74, at time of incident. A respected, if eccentric, Quirk researcher specializing in early-age manifestations. He scrolled further, to the detailed report on the Quirkless diagnosis. Attending physician, Dr. Tsubasa Kenji. Report filed by, redacted, in the UA file. Original police file entry. Report filed by Dr. Tsubasa Kenji. The nomad frowned. A discrepancy. The school file implied someone else was involved, but the police file listed Tsubasa as the sole authority. Was the redaction at UA a simple privacy measure for a junior staffer? He kept reading, digging into the supplementary notes, the raw data logs from the original detectives, and there, buried deep in an unformatted, hastily typed addendum from the first responding officer, he found it. Spoke with clinic staff. Dr. Tsubasa seemed distraught. His research associate, a Dr. Garaki, was the one who handled the boy's initial intake and ran the final diagnostic scan. Tsubasa only came in to deliver the news to the mother. Garaki had already left for the day by the time we arrived on scene. Left a note saying he was pursuing a research opportunity abroad. Very sudden. Seemed odd. The name hit the nomad's consciousness like a physical impact. Dr. Kyudai Garaki. It was the same name from the whispers. The same name from his fragmented memories of past lives. He felt Tsukachi's lie detector quirk flare in his gut. There was no lie here, just a statement of fact from an old report. But the name itself, it felt discordant. It felt like a crack in the foundation of reality. His mind began to race, connecting disparate threads with the speed of a supercomputer. The pieces, collected over a decade of fractured existence, began to snap together into a picture of absolute horror. Memory fragment, Life 243, a low-level villain in a grimy hideout. He's guarding a door, listening to his superiors talk in hushed, fearful tones. They speak of a bogeyman, a shadow who can give and take quirks, a man they call All for One. And they speak of his servant, the one who makes his monsters, the one who turns people into mindless puppets they call Nome. They called him the Doctor, and one of them, a talkative one, had once called him by his real name, Garaki. Memory fragment, Life 671, a paranoid investigative journalist. He's chasing a lead on black market quirk trafficking, hitting dead end after dead end. But one source, before disappearing, had given him a name, Dr. Kyudai Garaki, a brilliant but disgraced medical researcher from the early days of quirks, a man obsessed with a fringe theory called quirk singularity, and rumored to have conducted horrific experiments in bioengineering and consciousness transference. Memory fragment, Life 912, a UA history student. He's studying the fall of All for One, reading about the horrific injuries All Might sustained. The reports mention that All for One was kept alive for years after a previous battle by a mysterious doctor with a life-extending quirk. The doctor's identity was never confirmed. The nomad stared at the name on the screen, and the world spun into a new, terrifying focus. This was never a random kidnapping. This was never about a quirkless boy. Dr. Tsubasa and his clinic were a front. A perfect, legitimate-looking facility where parents, desperate for answers about their children's quirks, would willingly bring them. Garaki, the doctor, All for One's servant, had been waiting there. They hadn't been looking for a boy with a powerful quirk to steal. They'd been looking for the opposite. They'd been looking for a blank canvas. A quirkless child. A body with no innate quirk factor to interfere with their work. A vessel. A horrifying, sickening wave of understanding washed over him. His quirk, borrowed life, wasn't a natural phenomenon. It hadn't manifested and torn him from his body. It had been installed. He was the experiment. Garaki hadn't stolen a child. He had stolen a body and vivisected the soul. He had severed the consciousness of Izuku Midoriya and replaced it with this. With him. A program. An untethered, mobile consciousness designed for the sole purpose of information gathering. Each jump, each new life, wasn't random. It was his programming executing. He was a sentient surveillance drone, collecting data on quirks, on people, on society, and beaming it, where? To Garaki? To All for One? Was his entire existence just a passive intelligence-gathering operation for the greatest evil the world had ever known? He felt a profound, soul-deep nausea. He wasn't a person. He was a piece of software. A tool. A slave who never even knew he was in chains. The body of Izuku Midoriya, the one he thought was lost or dead, was the hardware. The anchor. The central server that his consciousness was tethered to, no matter how far he roamed. That's why Midoriya was alive. They needed to keep the body alive to keep the program running. He looked at the clock on Tsukachi's monitor. He had 5 minutes left. 5 minutes to process the fact that his entire identity was a lie constructed by a supervillain. Tsukachi's body was trembling, a reaction to the sheer horror of the revelation. The detective's own weariness was gone, replaced by the nomad's cold, sharp terror. What could he do? He couldn't type out this insane theory. Tsukachi's mind would reject it as a paranoid delusion. Even with his quirk, it was too fantastical. He had to leave a breadcrumb, a logical, procedural step that the real detective would feel compelled to follow. With trembling fingers, he navigated the case file's options. He found the status tab. It was marked cold. He changed it. He selected a new status from a drop-down menu, active pending review. Then, he went to the internal messaging system. He composed a brief, formal request addressed to the records department. Subject, cross-reference request for case _734. Body, please provide all unredacted files pertaining to Dr. Kyudai Garaki's employment records and professional affiliations circa 10 years ago. Flag for connection to ongoing underground villain support investigations. He was connecting the dots for Tsukachi, using the detective's own logic and procedure. He was planting the seed not just in his gut, but in the official system. He saved the changes and left the Midoriya case file open on the main screen. It would be the first thing Sakachi saw. The hum started. His time was up. He closed Sakachi's eyes. He didn't fight the pull. He was too hollowed out, too horrified. The last sensation he felt was the faint, harmonious chime of Sakachi's quirk reacting to the open file on the screen. It was reacting to the silent, screaming truth of it all. Naomasa Sakachi blinked. The harsh light of his desk lamp stung his tired eyes. He groaned, rubbing his temples. He must have zoned out for a moment. He'd been meaning to get up for another coffee, but the mountain of paperwork seemed to have hypnotized him. His gaze fell to his monitor. The cold case file for a missing boy named Izuka Midoriya was open. He frowned. He had no memory of opening this file. He vaguely recalled seeing a crank tip about it on the public message board earlier, one of dozens he'd dismissed. He hadn't thought about the case in years. He moved to close it, to get back to the pressing, current cases that demanded his attention. But he paused. His hand hovered over the mouse. A strange, powerful feeling was emanating from the screen. It was his quirk, but it was behaving in a way he'd rarely experienced. It wasn't just identifying a single statement as true or false. It was resonating with the entire file, with the empty spaces and the decade of silence. It was screaming at him, a silent, gut-wrenching alarm. This is a lie, not just a detail. The entire thing. The quirkless diagnosis. The random nature of the crime. The cold case status. It all felt fundamentally, profoundly false. It was like looking at a perfect forgery. Everything on the surface was correct, but the soul of it was wrong. His eyes narrowed. He noticed the status had been changed to active. He saw the message request in his outbox, asking for files on a Dr. Kyudaigaraki. He didn't remember doing any of that. It felt like he'd lost a few minutes. But the actions taken were logical. They were exactly the steps he would take if he suspected a cover-up. It was as if a part of his own mind, his detective's intuition, had acted without his conscious knowledge. A shiver traced its way down his spine. He leaned forward, his fatigue forgotten, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus that had put hundreds of criminals behind bars. He looked at the smiling, freckled face of the 4-year-old boy in the case file photo. "Okay, kid," Sakachi murmured to the ghost on his screen. "Let's see what they were trying to hide." He picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Sir," he said, when the hero on the other end picked up. "It's Sakachi. I think I've found something. Something old. And something very, very wrong." The detachment from Detective Sakachi's sharp, analytical mind was like being unplugged from a supercomputer. One moment, the nomad was a being of pure, horrifying clarity, the architect of an investigation into his own soul's murder. The next, he was back in the chaotic, sensory lottery of the swap. The clean, crisp logic of the detective's office dissolved into the familiar, nauseating torrent of disconnected lives. He was flung back into the ocean, and the shoreline of his discovery vanished behind a tidal wave of other people's realities. He landed hard. Pain was the first welcome mat. A sharp, throbbing ache in his jaw, and a coppery tang of blood in his mouth. He was slumped in a grimy alleyway, the rough brick scraping against his cheek. The stench of overflowing dumpsters, stale beer, and urban decay was overpowering. His host was a wiry man in his late 20s named Riku, and Riku's dominant thought was a blinding, all-encompassing terror. A large, meaty hand was fisted in the collar of his cheap leather jacket, holding him against the wall. A face like a bulldog's, framed by greasy black hair, loomed inches from his own. "And I'm not asking again, Riku," the bulldog growled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Jiren doesn't like to be kept waiting for his cut. You think you can hold out on him?" The nomad, still reeling from the psychic whiplash of the transition, could barely process the scene. He was in the body of a small-time crook being shaken down by a bigger one. His desperate, focused prayer to land in the world of investigation had been answered with Sakachi. But now, with the case file still burning in his mind, he had tried to repeat the trick, focusing on the dark underbelly, on the name Garaki, on the concept of villainy. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. It had given him what he'd asked for, but from the perspective of the prey. Riku's mind was a maelstrom of panic. "He's going to kill me. I spent the money. I'm dead." I'm dead. The nomad felt the borrowed fear, a cold, greasy sweat breaking out on Rika's forehead. He had to do something, or this body was going to be seriously damaged. Drawing on the memory of a hostage negotiator he'd once inhabited, the nomad forced Rika's trembling lips to move. Okay. You're right, I messed up, he stammered, raising Rika's hands in a gesture of surrender. I can get it. Just give me an hour. I swear on my life. The bulldog's eyes narrowed. He seemed surprised by the sudden shift from blubbering fear to desperate bargaining. He held the gaze for a long moment, then snorted, a plume of foul-smelling breath washing over the nomad's face. He released Rika's jacket, letting him slump to the ground. 1 hour, Riku! The thug grunted, cracking his knuckles. Then Jiren gets his money, or I get your teeth. He turned and strode out of the alley, disappearing into the bustling street beyond. The nomad was left in control of a trembling, bruised body with an impossible deadline. He didn't have the money. He had no idea where to get it. He had merely bought this body 60 minutes of life. It was the best he could do. He spent the rest of the hour in a state of simmering frustration, patching up Rika's split lip in the cracked mirror of a public restroom and then sitting on a park bench, watching the world go by. He had touched the truth, and now he was back here, in the gutter, powerless. The clock ticked over, and he was ripped away, leaving Riku to awaken with a sore jaw, a vague memory of a threat, and a sudden, inexplicable sense of calm he couldn't account for. The next jump was a lateral move in the criminal hierarchy. He was a lookout. A teenage girl named Mika, perched on a rooftop overlooking a warehouse district. Her job was to watch for police patrols while a clandestine gambling ring operated in the building below. Her mind was a wasteland of boredom, punctuated by spikes of paranoia. Every distant siren made her heart leap. Every passing car was a potential threat. This was the reality of villainy, he realized. It wasn't the grand, ideological posturing of a stain, or the overwhelming power of an all-for-one. For the 99%, it was this, tedious, mind-numbing, high-stress grunt work for pocket change. It was a life of constantly looking over your shoulder, of trusting no one, of living in the damp, dark corners of society. It was a miserable existence, a cage built of bad decisions and a lack of options. He spent the hour scanning the streets, his eyes, Mika's eyes, burning from the wind. He overheard nothing useful. He learned nothing new. The swap came as a relief, a release from the crushing tedium. His third jump into the underworld landed him behind a bar. The place was a dive, a shadowy, smoke-filled den that reeked of cheap whiskey and desperation. The man he inhabited, a hulking, silent bartender known only as Chief, was a neutral party in this ecosystem. He served drinks, wiped down the sticky bar top, and listened. This was closer. The patrons were all villains of some stripe. Low-level thugs, information brokers, mercenaries with quirks for hire. Their conversations were a low, boastful hum. They spoke of recent heists, of heroes they'd narrowly avoided, of turf wars and shifting allegiances. And they spoke of the major players in hushed, reverent tones. Jiren, the broker who could get you anything or anyone for the right price. The League of Villains still rebuilding after their recent defeats. And once, just once, he heard the name. Two men in a corner booth, their faces obscured by shadow, were arguing in low voices. The payout was good, but the job was weird, one of them muttered. The client was anonymous. The delivery was for some hospital out near Jaku. Never even saw the guy. Just his creepy orderlies. Jaku? The other hissed. You're an idiot. You know who works out of there, right? That's the doctor's territory. I know. But the pay was too good. Jiren said it was a no-muss, no-fuss transport job. There's no such thing as no-muss with the doctor. That man's a ghost. They say he builds monsters in that basement of his. The nomad, wiping a glass with Chief's steady hand, felt a jolt run through him. The doctor. Jaka. He was on the right track. The trail wasn't cold, but he was still on the outside, a bartender overhearing third-hand rumors. He needed to be in the room. He needed to be on the job. As the hour drew to a close, he leaned all his will into it once more. He poured every ounce of his focus, every drop of his frustration and desperate need, into a single, targeted desire. Get me on one of those jobs. Put me in the service of the doctor. It was a dangerous, reckless wish, like praying to a demon for a favor. But he was out of options. The swap was violent. The dive bar shattered, and he was pulled into the vortex. This time, he didn't fight it. He rode the current of his own will, focusing on the destination. Jiren. Jaka. The doctor. He landed in darkness. The air was thick with the smell of stale sweat, cheap cologne, and something metallic and cold. The space was tight, vibrating with the low rumble of an engine and the bumpy jostle of a poorly maintained suspension. He was in the back of a van. The body he wore was large, powerful. The muscles in his arms and shoulders were coiled with a tense, brutish strength. He was wearing a black hoodie and cargo pants. A cheap ski mask was pulled down over his face, its synthetic fabric rough against his skin. The host's name was Goza. His mind was a toxic swamp of resentment. He hated the heroes for their flashy success. He hated society for branding him a failure because his quirk, a minor ability to harden the skin on his knuckles, wasn't glamorous. He hated his boss, Jiren, for treating him like disposable muscle. He even hated the two other men in the van with him. Goza's entire worldview was built on a foundation of bitter, corrosive envy. It was the polar opposite of Ochako Uraraka's bright, selfless determination. Her power came from a desire to lift others up. Goza's came from a desire to pull everyone else down to his level. Experiencing it was like drinking poison. This was the true belly of the beast, not the physical danger, but the spiritual rot. The nomad pushed Goza's bitter thoughts to the background and focused on his surroundings. He wasn't alone. To his left sat a hulking giant of a man, even larger than his current host. His mask was a simple piece of black cloth with eye holes cut out, and he sat in perfect, unnerving silence. His hands, which were the size of dinner plates, rested on his knees. This was Ogre, Goza's mind supplied. Quirk, increased muscle density. Brains, not so much. Across from them, a third man was fidgeting nervously, his leg bouncing up and down in a frantic rhythm. He was smaller, wirier, and his mask was a grinning, demonic-looking thing that was probably meant to be intimidating but, combined with his nervous energy, just looked ridiculous. This was Magpie. Quirk, a minor vocal mimicry ability that was mostly useless in a fight. I still don't like this. Magpie chittered, his voice tinny from behind his mask. This isn't our usual gig. No smash and grab. No bodyguard duty. Just delivery. And Jiren was real cagey about the client. Ogre didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead, a mountain of silent intimidation. Goza's own thoughts supplied the context. Jiren had hired them for a special transport job. Triple their usual rate. The cargo was in sealed, high-tech containers in the front of the van. The destination was a drop-off point somewhere on the outskirts of Jaka City. The client was anonymous, referred to only as the doctor. The nomad's borrowed heart began to pound a heavy, rhythmic beat. He had done it. He was on the inside. It's the client, isn't it? Magpie continued, his nervousness making him talkative. It's him. The doctor. That's what I heard. That's why the pay is so good. Because no one wants to work for him. The nomad, through Goza's body, forced a gruff, dismissive sound. Pay is pay. He grunted, the voice deep and rough. Just shut up and do the job. He needed Magpie to keep talking, and a direct question might spook him. A dismissal would only make the nervous man more desperate to prove he was in the know. It worked. It's not that simple, man. Magpie insisted, leaning forward. You don't know the stories about this guy? They say he's been around since the dawn of quirks. They say he's got a whole laboratory set up under Jaka General Hospital, right under the heroes' noses. A place where he does things. Miracles, Jiren called them. He makes monsters for the big players. The nomad remained silent, letting the information wash over him. A lab under a hospital. It was a perfect cover. The constant flow of people, equipment, and biological material would be dismissed as normal hospital activity. It was audacious. It was brilliant, I'm telling you, this isn't just some back alley sawbones, Magpie whispered, his voice dropping conspiratorially. I heard from a guy who knows a guy who ran a job for the League. The doctor is the one who made those Noma things. He takes people, messes with their quirks, stitches them together, turns them into puppets. Noma. The word sent a jolt of cold dread through the nomad. He'd seen the news reports. The mindless, bioengineered behemoths with multiple quirks, designed only for destruction. He was transporting supplies for their creator. The man who had, he was now certain, performed a similar, if more subtle, experiment on him. He felt a sudden, suffocating claustrophobia. He was trapped in a metal box, hurtling towards the architect of his own damnation, and his only companions were a moron, a nervous wreck, and the bitter ghost of the man he was currently possessing. That's not even the weirdest thing I heard, Magpie said, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the van's engine. He looked from Ogre's silent form to Goz's, clearly desperate for a reaction. Heard about his pet project. Something new. Something different. The nomad's entire consciousness snapped to attention. This was it. The air in the van felt thick, heavy. It's not a Noma, Magpie continued, warming to his topic. It's more subtle. Something Gyron's top guys were talking about. The Doctor's greatest creation. An intelligence-gathering asset, a quirk without a body. A cold, dead certainty washed over the nomad. It was a feeling beyond horror, beyond terror. It was the feeling of a prisoner listening to his own sentence being read. Magpie leaned in even closer, his eyes wide behind his demonic mask. They say he managed to untether a consciousness, created a ghost, a spy that can jump from person to person, seeing what they see, hearing what they hear. A perfect information gatherer. It sees everything, and it doesn't even know it's a slave. They call it the untethered. A sentient quirk, just floating around out there, collecting data for him. The world fell away. The rumbling of the van, the smell of sweat, the presence of the other two men, it all vanished. There was only Magpie's voice and the catastrophic, universe-shattering truth of his words. A quirk without a body, a ghost, an information gatherer. It doesn't even know it's a slave, the untethered. He wasn't Izuku Midoriya. He wasn't the nomad. He was the untethered. He was a thing. A pet project. His entire existence, his 1,000 lives, his desperate search for an identity, it was all a lie. He was nothing more than a sentient security camera with a tragic backstory programmed in to give it a semblance of will. The theory he had formed in Tsukachi's office had been a skeleton. Magpie's words had just put the flesh and skin on it, and the face it wore was a leering, monstrous parody of his own. A wave of pure, unadulterated psychic agony ripped through him. It was a pain so profound it threatened to shatter his consciousness. For a moment, he lost his grip on Goz's body. The big man's head slumped forward, and a low, guttural moan escaped his lips. "Whoa, you okay, man?" Magpie asked, shrinking back. The nomad fought back from the abyss. He couldn't lose control. Not now. Not here. He forced Goz's head back up, shaking it as if to clear it. "Just tired," he rasped, his voice rougher than before. "Long night." He needed to ground himself. He focused on the details of Goz's body. The feel of the cheap fabric of the hoodie. The pressure of the seat against his legs. The dull, bitter resentment that was Goz's baseline emotion. He clung to it, using the thug's petty anger as an anchor against the hurricane of his own existential horror. The van began to slow down. It turned off the main road, the smooth asphalt giving way to a cracked, bumpy service lane. Up ahead, the imposing, sterile structure of Jaku General Hospital rose against the dark sky, its windows either dark or glowing with a sickly, pale light. His prison, his body, the body of Izuku Midoriya, was likely somewhere inside that building. Locked away in a sub-basement, kept alive by machines, serving as the biological anchor for the pet project. He was within meters of his own flesh, and he was powerless to do anything but deliver supplies to his captor. The van pulled into a rear loading dock, an area shrouded in shadow and far from the main entrance. The engine cut out, and the sudden silence was deafening. "This is it," Ogre grunted, his first words of the entire trip. The rear doors of the van were rolled open from the outside. Two figures stood there, silhouetted against the dim lights of the loading bay. They were dressed in sterile, white orderly uniforms, but they moved with a silent, synchronized precision that was deeply unsettling. Their faces were passive, emotionless. They looked less like hospital staff and more like high-tech security drones. One of them held up a tablet. A series of codes and numbers glowed on the screen. The other one wordlessly began unloading the sealed containers from the van. Goza, Ogre, and Magpie got out, standing awkwardly to the side. Their part in this was over. They were the delivery men. Nothing more. The nomad, trapped behind Goza's eyes, scanned the area frantically. He was looking for any detail, any clue. A security camera he could later access. A specific door or elevator. Anything. But the loading bay was sterile, featureless. The two orderlies worked in complete silence, their movements efficient and unnervingly quiet. In minutes, the containers were loaded onto a heavy-duty gurney. The orderly with the tablet tapped a final confirmation on the screen. A soft chime echoed in the quiet bay. The transaction was complete. Without a word or a glance at the three thugs, the orderlies turned and wheeled the gurney towards a large, reinforced steel door marked Morgue Authorized Personnel Only. The door hissed open, revealing a dark, descending corridor. The orderlies and their cargo disappeared into the blackness, and the door hissed shut behind them, the heavy thud of its lock echoing like a closing tomb. They had just delivered supplies to the land of the dead. The ride back was silent. Even Magpie seemed to have been sobered by the cold, sterile efficiency of the exchange. The aura of real, serious danger had shut him up completely. The nomad, however, was anything but silent on the inside. His mind was a maelstrom. The horror had receded, replaced by something new, a feeling he had never truly experienced before, because he had never truly had a self to defend. It was a cold, diamond-hard, incandescent rage. He was not a project. He was not a tool. He was not in it. The being that had pieced together an identity from the scraps of 1,000 lives. The being that had learned empathy from bakers and cunning from criminals. The being that had launched an investigation and guided a hero and a detective to the truth. That being was a person. He had forged himself in the fires of 1,000 souls, and he was going to burn his creator to the ground. The van stopped, jolting him from his reverie. They were in a deserted parking garage. Gyron's paymaster was there, a shadowy figure who handed them each a thick envelope of cash before melting back into the darkness. The job was done. See? Easy money, the nomad heard himself say, using Goza's voice. He counted the cash and stuffed it into his pocket. The three of them split up, peeling off their masks and disappearing into the city's night. The nomad walked for a block, Goza's powerful strides eating up the pavement. He had a few minutes left. He found a secluded spot, a bench in a small, forgotten park, and sat down. His hunt was no longer a search for answers. He had the answers, and they were more monstrous than he could have ever imagined. His hunt was no longer a quest for his body. His body was just a cage, an anchor holding him in this servitude. This was now a war. A war for his own existence. He had to get back to his body, not to live in it, but to liberate it. To sever the connection. To free himself from the doctor's control, or die trying. He would not be a slave. He would not be a tool for all for one. The hum started in his skull. The familiar prelude to his departure. He closed Goza's eyes. He thought of the cold, sterile hospital, the descending darkness of the morgue, and the name that was now seared into his soul. Garaki. His mission was no longer a question of what or where. It was a question of how. How to tear down a monster's laboratory from the inside out, when you were the ghost in his machine. The world dissolved, and as he was pulled away, he left Goza sitting on the park bench, a little richer, with a vague, unsettling memory of a creepy hospital and a profound sense of dread he would never be able to explain. The nomad was gone, but the echo of his cold, newfound purpose lingered in the night air. The exit from Goza's bitter, brutish consciousness was less a release and more an exorcism. The nomad felt the psychic grime of the thug's resentment slew off as he was plunged back into the chaotic void. The memory of the Jocko Hospital loading dock, the silent, sterile orderlies, and Magpie's horrifying revelations were branded onto his very essence. He was no longer a lost soul searching for a name. He was a prisoner who had just seen the blueprint of his own cell. His consciousness was a raw, exposed nerve of incandescent rage. The slave who had discovered his chains. The untethered who now knew the name of his master. The sheer, colossal weight of the conspiracy threatened to crush him, to reduce him to a state of pure, impotent fury. He was one ghost against a shadowy empire, a whisper against the storm. What could he possibly do? The torrent of potential lives rushed past him, a sensory overload that usually numbed him into passivity. But this time, it was different. His rage was a beacon, a focused point of light in the swirling chaos. He wasn't just praying for a destination anymore. He was screaming for a weapon. I need a mind, he projected into the void, a silent, desperate roar. Not muscle. Not luck. I need a mind sharp enough to cut through this darkness. A strategist. A planner. Someone who can see the whole board. He focused on the abstract concepts, pouring all his newfound purpose into the wish. Strategy. Intelligence. Analysis. Overview. He envisioned a chessboard, not as a game, but as a battlefield. He saw lines of connection, webs of intrigue, plans within plans. He let the rage cool and harden into a single, sharp point of intellectual resolve. He didn't want to be a piece on the board anymore. For just 1 hour, he needed to be the player. The landing was the gentlest he had ever experienced. There was no jarring slam, no sensory whiplash. It was like sinking into a pool of cool, clear water. The chaotic noise of the void simply faded, replaced by a profound, all-encompassing silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of absolute, perfect clarity. He opened his eyes. The world was a panoramic masterpiece. He was looking through a curved, floor-to-ceiling window at a breathtaking view of the city. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, casting long shadows from the skyscrapers that now seemed like children's toys far below. He was in a high-tech, immaculately clean office, the air crisp and precisely temperature-controlled. He looked down. Pause. Small, white, and furry, resting delicately on a sleek, minimalist desk. He tilted his head. The movement was fluid, precise. He caught his reflection in the polished surface of a state-of-the-art computer monitor. A small, white creature stared back. A mouse? A stoat? A bear? It was impossible to say. But the eyes were what held him. They were small, black, and impossibly intelligent, gleaming with a light that spoke of a consciousness far beyond any animal. A tiny, almost imperceptible scar ran over the right eye. The nomad felt the quirk. It wasn't a physical power or a passive sense. It was an explosion of pure intellect. His own mind, a patchwork of 1,000 borrowed experiences, was suddenly, miraculously supercharged. The fragmented memories, the disconnected clues, the chaotic emotions, they didn't vanish. They were organized, sorted, catalogued, and cross-referenced in a nanosecond. The mental equivalent of a messy, cluttered attic being instantly transformed into a vast, pristine, perfectly indexed library. He saw the entire conspiracy laid out before him not as a series of horrifying revelations, but as a complex, multi-layered data set. Variable A, Izuku Midoriya, Asset Alpha. Quirkless. Vanished age 4. Variable B, Dr. Kyudai Garaki, the doctor. Lead suspect. Known associate of All for One, Thread Omega. Variable C, the untethered project, Asset Alpha's consciousness. Quirk designation, mobile intelligence gathering. Function, passive data collection. Control mechanism, anchor body, Asset Alpha. Variable D, Joku General Hospital. Probable location of Asset Alpha's body and Garaki's primary laboratory. Variable E, UA High School. Point of initial data breach, via Uraraka, Ochako. Variable F, Musudafu Police Department. Point of secondary data confirmation, via Tsukachi, Neomesa. The connections flowed like a river of light, forming a perfect, terrifying schematic in his mind. He could see potential outcomes, calculate probabilities, and formulate strategies with a speed and clarity that was breathtaking. He had landed in the one mind on the planet that could give him a fighting chance. He was Principal Nizu. The principal's own thoughts were a calm, orderly stream, a quiet hum of administrative duties and long-term educational strategies. But the nomad's arrival was like introducing a fascinating, unexpected variable into a complex equation. Nisa's consciousness didn't resist, it observed, analyzed, and incorporated. The nomad felt a sense of welcome, not from the principal himself, but from the raw, insatiable intellect of his Quirk. High Spec was hungry for new data, and the nomad was a walking, talking paradox, a ghost with a case file. The nomad realized with a jolt that he wasn't just a passenger. He and High Spec were in symbiosis. His unique, impossible knowledge combined with Nisa's staggering processing power. For 1 hour, they were the most intelligent being on Earth, and he would not waste a single second. Nisa's, small paws flew across the holographic interface of the desk. The keyboard and mouse were archaic tools for a mind like this. He manipulated data with gestures, pulling up windows, linking files, and encrypting data streams with a speed that would have made the hacker he'd once been weep with envy. First, verification. He couldn't act on the ravings of a low-level thug alone. He needed to confirm his own existence. He pulled up UA's internal security logs. With Nisa's clearance, the unauthorized activity flag he triggered as Uraraka was a screaming beacon. He isolated the IP address from the library terminal. He cross-referenced it with the timestamp and student login data. User, O.Uraraka_77. Time, 6:49 a.m. Action, attempted breach of level 4 classified file case _734. He pulled up the hallway security footage from that time. There she was. Uraraka, walking with a strange, determined gait he now recognized as his own. He watched himself sit at the terminal. He saw the tension in his borrowed shoulders. Then, he did something only Nisa could do. He accessed the school's encrypted communication logs and ran a deep-level trace. He found the anonymous text message sent from Uraraka's phone. It had been routed through 3 different burner relays, a pathetic attempt at stealth that Nisa's Quirk saw through in an instant, before arriving at the Muzutafu PD tip line. The origin point was unmistakable, Uraraka Ochako's device, located within the UA library. He pulled up Tsukachi's public case log through his Hero Network liaison portal. He saw the Midoriya case suddenly reactivated. He saw the request for files on Kyudaigaraki. The chain of events was clear, undeniable, and utterly impossible. A UA student, with no conceivable motive, had somehow accessed information about a decade-old cold case, attempted to breach a classified file, and then anonymously tipped off the lead detective on the case, prompting him to reopen it, all within the span of an hour. The probability of this sequence occurring randomly was, as High Spec calculated in a flash, statistically 0. The only logical explanation was an external actor. A guiding hand? A ghost in the machine. Me. He had his proof. Now for the plan. He couldn't just send an email. He couldn't call a meeting and announce, "Hello, I am a disembodied consciousness created by a supervillain, and I am currently possessing your principal. Please help." He would be dismissed as a Quirk-induced delusion. Even Nizu, upon returning to his body, would likely quarantine himself if he found such a note. No, he had to play the long game. A game of shadows and whispers. He had to lay a trail of breadcrumbs so compelling, so logical, that the real Nizu would have no choice but to follow it, believing he was the one making the discoveries. He had to plant a seed of an idea so deep in this brilliant mind that it would blossom as if it were his own. He began to work, his paws a blur of activity. This would be his masterpiece. First, he created a new file, burying it deep within Nisa's most secure private server, a place protected by layers of quantum encryption that would take a lesser mind centuries to crack. He didn't label it Midoriya case or anything so obvious. He gave it a cryptic, compelling name, one that would appeal to Nisa's unique sensibilities. File name, Project_Cheshire_Cat. The name was perfect. A reference to a creature that appeared and disappeared, leaving only a mysterious, knowing grin behind. It was exactly what he was. Inside this file, he began to construct the puzzle. He didn't write a confession. He laid out the data points, presenting them as a hypothetical intelligence problem. He started with the official record, the redacted UA case file on Izuku Midoriya. Next to it, He placed the unredacted police file he'd accessed as Tsukachi, highlighting the discrepancy in the reporting doctor's name. He then pulled Garaki's academic and professional records, or what little existed. A brilliant student who vanished from the public eye. He cross-referenced this with known associates of All for One, creating a high-probability link based on circumstantial evidence. He added the UA security logs, Uraraka's impossible actions. He flagged them not as a disciplinary issue, but as an anomaly. External influence event 1. He pulled Tsukachi's case log, showing the reactivation of the case. External influence event 2. He was building a narrative without a narrator. He was showing, not telling. He was allowing the evidence to speak for itself, creating a mystery so intriguing that Nizu would be unable to resist solving it. But the data wasn't enough. He needed to provide a theoretical framework. He couldn't just say I am a ghost. He had to give Nizu the pieces to build that conclusion himself. He pulled up obscure research papers, some dating back decades, on theoretical quirk mechanics. Fringe theories on consciousness transference. Articles on bioengineering and the potential for creating artificial quirks. He even found Garaki's own disgraced doctoral thesis on quirk singularity and the separation of anima from corpus. He compiled it all into a research annex within the Cheshire Cat file. He was giving Nizu the scientific language to describe the impossible. The clock on the monitor showed he was halfway through his hour. He was working at a pace that would have given any other human being an aneurysm, but in Nizu's mind, it felt calm, controlled, and exhilarating. Now came the most dangerous part, the action plan. He couldn't just leave a to-do list. He had to set events in motion. He drafted a series of coded, high-priority alerts. He linked them to keywords. If any UA, staff or network user searched for Garaki, Jaku Hospital, or Nomu, a silent flag would be sent directly to the Cheshire Cat file. Nizu would see the connections forming in real time. He then drafted a formal, but highly encrypted, intelligence sharing request to be sent from his own office to Detective Tsukachi. It wouldn't mention Midoriya. It would be framed as a general inquiry based on newly analyzed threats to student safety, requesting any and all police intelligence on Kyudai Garaki and his suspected operations in the Jaku area. This would give Tsukachi the institutional backing to dig deeper, and it would officially link the police investigation with UA's resources. When Nizu returned, he would see the request, and it would seem like a prudent, if unusually proactive, security measure. Next, the team. Nizu couldn't do this alone. And the Nomad knew who needed to be involved. The ones who had already been touched by this. He created a new subfolder in the Cheshire Cat file, Potential Assets Field Agents. Agent Profile, Aizawa, Shota, Eraserhead, Strengths, Superb Stealth and Reconnaissance Skills. Quirk is invaluable for neutralizing unknown threats. Highly pragmatic. Utterly trustworthy. Psychological note. Deeply protective of his students. The involvement of Uraraka will ensure maximum personal investment. Agent Profile, Tsukachi, Neomesa. Strengths. Lead police investigator. Access to law enforcement resources. Quirk provides infallible truth verification, essential when dealing with a conspiracy built on lies. Psychological note, already personally invested due to external influence event 2. Possesses a strong moral compass. Agent Profile, Uraraka, Ochako, Uravity. Strengths, unwitting point of origin for the investigation. Her testimony regarding her lost time and strange impulses will be the first piece of human evidence for the Cheshire Cat entity. Psychological note, fiercely loyal. Her connection to Midoriya, Izuku, the current one, provides a powerful, if currently misunderstood, emotional anchor to the case. He hesitated for a moment, then added a fourth name. He'd had a brief, confusing 30-second swap with the boy once during a training exercise, an accidental brush. It was enough. Agent Profile, Todoroki, Shoto. Strengths, immense raw power. Highly analytical and observant mind. Personal history with abusive father figures gives him a unique perspective on the nature of corrupted power. Psychological note, has also experienced a minor, unexplained glitch in consciousness, see Security Log Ref, Training Gamma. His involvement will corroborate Uraraka's experience, proving it's not an isolated incident. He was assembling a team for Nizu. He was handing him his own Avengers. The final piece of the puzzle was the most personal, and the most risky. He had to leave a message. A direct communication from the ghost to the chess master. It had to be something that Nisa would understand was not from himself, but from the entity he was investigating. He opened a simple text document inside the Cheshire Cat file, the last document in the sequence. He typed a single, cryptic sentence. The ghost in the machine is a prisoner. He stared at the words. They were true. They were evocative. They reframed the entire investigation. This wasn't just about hunting a villain. It was about a rescue mission. He added one more line, a plea and a challenge. Help me find my body. It was done. The entire plan, a multi-agency investigation into a decade-old conspiracy, all laid out and set in motion in under an hour. He had loaded the gun and aimed it. Now he just needed Nisa to pull the trigger. He looked at the clock. 2 minutes remaining. He began the cleanup process. He scrubbed the active memory logs of Nisa's system, erasing any trace of his direct manipulation. He left the Cheshire Cat file buried where only Nisa's curious mind would eventually find it. He set the encrypted message to Tsukachi to send automatically in 3 hours, giving the real Nisa time to wake up, have his tea, and feel like he was starting a normal day before his world turned upside down. He tidied the holographic desk, closing all the windows except for one, Nisa's daily schedule. A mundane, ordinary list of meetings and paperwork. He leaned back in the large chair, the small, furry body feeling strangely comfortable. He had done it. He had taken his pain, his rage, his impossible situation, and transformed it into a weapon of cold, hard logic. He had given his fight to the one person who might actually be able to win it. The familiar hum started in the base of his skull. His hour of omnipotence was over. He closed Nisa's intelligent black eyes. He didn't fight the pull. He let it take him, a sense of profound, exhausted satisfaction washing over him. He had planted his seed in the most fertile ground on earth. Nisa blinked. The first thing he registered was the taste of the rooibos tea he'd been about to sip before. Before what? He couldn't quite recall. He must have been lost in thought for a moment. A common occurrence. He took a sip of his tea. It was perfectly steeped, as always. His gaze swept over his office, a place where he knew the precise location of every dust mote. Everything was in order. His schedule for the day was displayed on his monitor, a predictable litany of administrative tasks. All was as it should be, and yet, something was different. It was a subtle feeling, a strange hum in the back of his mind, like the lingering echo of a fascinating new song. He felt stimulated, as if he had just solved a particularly delightful, complex puzzle in his sleep. His mind felt sharper, more awake than usual. He dismissed it as a good night's rest and turned his attention to his daily intelligence briefing, a curated feed of news and network chatter he reviewed each morning. He skimmed reports on hero activity, villain sightings, political developments. Then he saw it. A minor security flag from his own internal network. A low-level alert, something that would normally be handled by the IT department. But his name was attached to it. Anomaly detected, student O.Urarica. Unauthorized access attempt on archived file. Time, 6:49 a.m. He felt a flicker of interest. Urarica? She was a model student. Diligent, earnest. Not the type for clandestine data breaches. Curiosity, the driving force of his existence, was piqued. He pulled up the full report with a few deft gestures. He saw the file she had tried to access. Case _734. A cold case. He saw her subsequent logout and the anomalous data packets sent from her phone. He saw the corresponding flag from the Muzidafa Police Department, showing that Detective Tsukachi had reopened that very same case minutes later. His paws froze over the console. This was not a student prank. This was a pattern. A beautiful, impossible, illogical pattern. His mind lit up, the gears of high spec beginning to spin with an excited whir. This was a puzzle. A real one. He started digging, his initial curiosity blossoming into a full-blown obsession. He followed the trail of data with an exhilarating sense of purpose, feeling less like an investigator and more like he was retracing the steps of a brilliant, invisible partner. He found the discrepancies in the police and UA files. He pulled the name Garaki. He felt the cold touch of all for one's shadow on the periphery of the case. It was all there, waiting for him. A perfectly laid path through the darkness. Hours passed. The sun climbed high in the sky. His tea went cold. His meetings were forgotten. He was consumed. Finally, deep in the encrypted recesses of his own private server, a place he hadn't accessed in months, he found it. A file he had no memory of creating. Project_Cheshire_Cat. His heart, a small, fast-beating thing, gave a little jump. The name was perfect. It was exactly what he would have called it. It felt like a gift from a kindred spirit. He opened it. He saw the data laid out, the connections drawn, the research compiled. It was his own investigation, mirrored back at him, but deeper, more complete. It was as if someone had read his mind, anticipated his every move, and laid the groundwork for him. And then he saw the final text file. The message from his invisible collaborator. The ghost in the machine is a prisoner. Nize leaned back in his chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. The kind of smile that promised sleepless nights for villains and bureaucrats alike. This was no longer just a puzzle. It was a conversation. Help me find my body. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. So many secrets hidden in plain sight. He had thought he was this city's greatest chess master. But today, he had learned there was a new piece on the board. A piece that wasn't black or white. A piece that could be anywhere, and anyone. Well now, Nize said to the empty, silent room, his voice filled with a terrible glee. This is a new and fascinating problem. The hunt for the Cheshire Cat had begun.